Welcome to the Waterloo City Council work session. Roll call, please.
Mr. Bozen,
Here.
Mr. Nichols, Ms. Creighton-Smith,
Here.
Mr. Childs, Mr. Greider,
Here.
Ms. Wilder,
Here.
and Mr. Foyce.
Here. Motion, please.
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to make a motion to adopt the agenda as proposed, as well as the approval of the minutes of the October 16th meeting as proposed.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. And we have a discussion on the Waterloo Safe Neighborhoods Commission.
Yes. So before I get overly started, I would like the commission members who are able to come tonight to just introduce themselves so that folks know who they can direct questions to, and then I'll kind of do a brief recap, and then I want to open it up for questions from council. So don't be shy. Yeah. If you just want to come to the podium, yes.
I know this routine. Caitlin Emmerich, I'm the Public Health Director for the Black Hawk County Health Department, and I joined the commission when Dr. Nafisa Sisier-Bonnier left Black Hawk County Public Health, so I was a little bit after the start of the commission.
Abraham Funches, Waterloo Human Rights Commission Director.
Good evening, Gwen Bramlett-Hecker. I'm the Executive Director of Riverview Center, and I was the Vice Chair of the Commission.
All right. And we have other commission members, but between a variety of other work commitments and some personal things, they were not able to be here, but we are very thankful for all of them who helped serve on this commission. So as you all know, a little over a year ago, we approved the creation of this commission to deal with an issue that Waterloo, along with many other urban areas in the United States, we're dealing with, which is gun violence, particularly as it relates to young folks. This commission met monthly via Zoom. In addition, it held a series of town hall meetings in order to make ourselves available to the public. Commission members were present in some capacity at all of them. These public forums were advertised in advance, both on social media and through our partners in the print and news media. We also conducted a survey that sought to collect data about the lived experiences of folks in Waterloo. Print copies of those were available, as well as digital copies, and we were able to get over 300 of those surveys back. We also partnered with the Public Science Collaborative from Iowa State University, who came in and walked us through some data, which informed many of the recommendations that we brought forward to the council. This commission is not the end of dealing with this issue. If there were a magic wand that we could solve gun violence, I think we would all have waved it long ago. But what this commission and the recommendations that it brings forward is an understanding that this issue, the issue of young folks making the choices that they make, is not something that happened in a week, in a month, in a year, in a term, and it won't be fixed in those periods of time either. We have to look at this long-term and holistically. I have had, as well as other commissioners, have had lots of conversations with folks. And this commission has been met with skepticism from some folks, and that's understandable. I know that in the past, folks have tried similar things, and everyone had a blue ribbon, and then they all patted themselves on the back, and then the problem stuck around. Other folks have expressed skepticism that this is a problem for those people. I wholeheartedly reject the idea that this is just a problem for one part of Waterloo, for one group in Waterloo. This is a challenge that faces all of us. These recommendations are built, of course, on the idea that Waterloo PD is doing a fantastic job of keeping us safe, and that folks should be held accountable when they break the law. No one here is advocating that those punishments should be diminished or that folks should not face justice when they commit injustice. However, when we are talking about 14, 15, 16-year-old kids in conversations that I have had, the threat of 25 to life in federal prison after having a couple of these charges is no longer scary to them. And the reason that it's not scary to them is because they don't plan on living past 21. And fundamentally, that represents a problem when young folks do not plan on living past their early 20s. So these recommendations cover a variety of things to address this issue, because the issue is, of course, gun violence, but it is a much larger upstream cause for why young folks believe that this is a way to solve their problems. You have all seen the recommendations. I hope that you have all read the recommendations. I am not going to go piece by piece through each of the recommendations, but we look at everything from environmental factors, including street lighting, to factors such as how we zone places, as well as the establishment of a couple of different entities that will look at this issue, because gun violence cannot just be solved by one vote, by one group. It has to be a community effort. And there is, and I can tell you this, a deep hunger in our community for us to help have these conversations. And it's a conversation that folks want to keep having. And that is part of these recommendations. I also understand deeply and fundamentally that these things cost money and that budgets are what budgets are. And so we have brought forward potential funding sources. Our federal partners, particularly in DC, have passed a fair amount of funding that we can use and apply for these types of projects. It will require that we work with partners in our community, including the school district, the county, as well as some other of our friends over at UNI, including the Violence Prevention Center. We understand fundamentally that what we are asking is for us to rethink how we address this issue. And we understand that that is a big ask. But we also know that every child in Waterloo deserves to live their full life, and that no one was born wanting to be shot to death outside their home. And so we bring these recommendations in the hopes that council will deeply consider them as we move forward. With that, are there any other commission members who would like to say anything before I open it up for questions?
Funches, Human Rights Director. I'd just like to highlight the recommendation of the environmental piece about improved lighting. That's been something that's been explored by council persons and other community activists for a while. And this is certainly a recommendation that I think is worthy of further exploration, increased lighting in certain pockets of community. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, sir.
I would like to echo Director Funchez's statement there. We already are doing a light study on our downtown, and I do agree that lighting is instrumental in creating vibrant neighborhoods. And I think that's the approach I'd like to see, is creating these vibrant neighborhoods and creating places that people want to invest in. And I would be behind something, speaking with Mid-American, speaking with neighborhoods about lighting and lighting in parks, for example. That's another place that we could definitely use more light, I guess. But that particular recommendation does stick to me because it expands its role in the community.
Thank you,
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, sir.
are there any alcohol outlet density benchmarks that we can lean on? Or what are the kind of guidelines or recommendations around that?
Yes, so, Mr. Mayor, sorry.
Go ahead.
ISU did present us with some data, and I had shared that with us when we had looked at it, but that was a while ago, so I can reshare that with council. I don't remember offhand what the specific metrics are, but they did have particular metrics about what level of density we should look at before we hit sort of a critical stage, as they put it. So I will reshare that data with council when I get back to my email this evening.
All right. To your question, maybe 9, 10 years ago, maybe even further back, while I was on council, so it's been a long time. I work with the planning and zoning department because what we were hearing is that there were overproliferation of liquor stores in concentrated areas. We had been receiving a number of calls in the 4th Street corridor, in the Logan Avenue corridor, in the Church Road area, and I think it was one other area, Broadway, and folks were concerned about it. So what we did is we put in an overlay district because when you hear certain stories, they say in certain communities you have a liquor store in a church, right? Well, if that's the case, then that's a zoning issue, right? Part of it is a zoning issue. And so we put in overlay districts and saw a dramatic decline in the amount of gun violence activities. Right now, we probably have one of the most restrictive ordinances in that regard. You can't, in certain areas, you cannot put a liquor store next to a church, a community center, a school. So what I would probably do is have our planning department, I know I work with Eric Schrader and Noel to kind of put that in place. And so we can have a conversation so we can see what we're currently doing before we move away from and see how that's worked. But I remember in one section of the community, there was probably 80 to 90 service calls. I remember actually a shooting directly in one of those places. And since we put the overlay in some of these areas, that's almost dwindled to almost none in certain circumstances. You know, like you can't, if you have had a liquor license after a certain amount of time, you can't put one right back in that area. A lot of things, some of these things were grandfathered in. And so, you know, we didn't have the ability to just put someone out of business. And so if that place had closed down and it was next to one of these areas we're talking about, like community center and the such, then if it goes past, I can't remember if it was 90 days, 120 days or something like that, then they couldn't do it. We also worked to adopt a ordinance where you couldn't put it in a certain place. And if you wanted to put in a place, it either had to be a convenience store and show the receipts from what they were selling, so it wouldn't be most gross would be alcohol sales. And so we put in that as well. And if you went so long, you were not able to put one back. If you did, it had to go to the Board of Adjustment. So we put in some mechanisms too. So it'd probably be a great time to revisit that and see how that's done and maybe even make some tweaks to it for current day operations.
Mr. Mayor,
Sir?
just to comment on that, when I was on the Board of Adjustments, we had this issue come up and we were told about how strict we are about it, and we were able to keep it how it is in the ordinance. So it's not that people go to the Board of Adjustments for this issue and are able to just shoo it by. The board is pretty strict on, we're not going to allow people to bypass this particular zoning ordinance.
But it'd be a great time to review, and some other things that we had stores do, like open lighting or being able to see in what you place up. But great time to revisit that.
Mr. Mayor,
Sir?
who monitors the yearly to make sure that they're selling as much food products as opposed to alcohol? And how do we as a city monitor that?
Noel Anderson, Community Planning and Development Director. So the ordinance was written a
in the hopes that everyone was doing a good job. And then if they're not, we have the ability to request the records. So we don't look at everyone's records on an annual basis, but the police department actually has the authority to request the records, and then we'll review them with the finance department for their percentages.
So how many times have we done that?
I want to say we've done it at least 3 or 4 times
And,
for, I think, 2 or 3 locations.
In how many years?
Probably about 8 years.
Okay. Thank you, Noel. And then a lot of these recommendations require staffing, which requires budgeting for staffing if we're going to adopt those. Even when you start talking about the streetlight program, because there are grants if we can get a grant, but then again we live and die by the grant because you have to budget to maintain that grant. You have to budget to maintain our Mid-America bill that we pay each month, and I agree that we do have areas in town that need more lighting. We just got to figure out how we're going to pay for it. Mr. Greider, when you said that these kids aren't afraid to go into federal prison for 25 years because they're not planning on living until past 21, where did that statistic come from compared to here in Waterloo?
Mr. Mayor. Yeah, so that is based on personal conversations I had with young folks.
Any idea? I mean, how many are we talking about here that these young folks are planning on not living till they're 21?
I mean, I could not give you a statistical number of how many young folks that is, but the fact that there were some, I think, suggests that we have to look at the policy. We have to look at the fact that for some folks who live in our town, that is what they see their life being. And we as elected leaders, whether it's 1 or 100,000, have a responsibility to take very seriously what young folks are telling us. I can tell you, I did not meet with every young person who lives in Waterloo. What I'm saying is that there is clearly a thread of thought among some folks that their life is going to be short. And that is just sadly the way that they see it. And I think that we need to work at, and it won't just be us, it has to be others. But I think we as a city have a responsibility to show young people that there is so much more, and we want them to be a part of it.
Mr. Mayor,
Well, I'm not,
I can-
I still have just a couple.
I can add,
Was
I
it
can
to-
add
it was
some
to the
insight
point that
into
you
what.
asked him about talking to the
Oh,
young
I'm
people.
sorry.
and
I
like
Yes.
the focus.
That's okay, I can add some insight. In working with juvenile justice and CJJP and some other youth organizations, young people, typically those that are marginalized and disenfranchised, do not believe they're going to live even past 18. So what we had to do with them was to give them some markers to help them see, like driver's license and things like that, to look beyond 18. So anywhere you can find that data, the Office of Juvenile Justice and Prevention will be able to give it to you. There's data that's suggested all over the place. Usually it's 18, 21 is probably being more generous, but typically it's year 18. They don't believe they're going to live past 18.
Thank you. And then finally, a lot of these funding sources are federally funded sources, which the fiscal year is October 1st to September 31st, and some of these deadlines have already passed. So I guess working in the federal cycle with grants and everything else, we'd have to be dealing with a year from now, because most of that money wouldn't be available, and I don't believe until October of 2024. So, but I do want to thank the commission for all their work and for all the meetings that they attended and the public meetings that they had. That it was a long year, and I appreciate their dedication to working on this problem. Thank you.
I just wanted to ask a question about the training that was recommended under the recommendations where you have, let's see, which bullet is it? 1, 2, 3. I think it's the sixth bullet point, where it talks about, sixth bullet point that talks about the youth violence prevention resource, and then the checklist as starting points after training in evidence-based practices. So where would the training take place? Who would take the training? Who provides the training? I'd like that information.
Hi, Gwen Bramlett-Hecker. So in speaking about this in the previous questions as well, I was thinking about the Center for Violence Prevention at UNI being, and that's part of the recommendation, but I want to second them as a partner in that. Through my work at Riverview Center, we have done a tremendous amount of facilitation of training with them and for them and by them in partnership with them. And so I think they would be a wonderful sort of implanted resource within our community that are vested in exactly that type of research. And I was thinking about that as well with the question about, the anecdotal versus the data of the hopelessness in teens. And a lot of that data also would be available through the Center for Violence Prevention as well. They would have a lot of that juvenile justice data at their fingertips that we would look at, because that's all about the prevention of violence, is getting them to see hope beyond the whatever. And to the question of grants, I was thinking particularly the Otto Schweitz Foundation that is listed there. They particularly, when you run a nonprofit, you do the grant dance really, really well. And so looking at, for example, the Schweitz Foundation, they absolutely have an appetite to do exactly what we're talking about, which is a cross-community collaboration of private and nonprofit partnerships to address specifically things like this. This is exactly the kind of project that they specifically look for. I know I also spoke with Erin Tink at the Waterloo Community Foundation, and she was talking about specific programs and funding for youth that they would absolutely be interested in looking at. Again, planning forward, not just sort of during their typical request for proposal cycle, but working with them sort of in advance to see about funding opportunities that would come. And a lot of those federal grants, we just received a big one at Riverview Center. They do kind of come on the October cycle, but oftentimes you will find RFPs at different times for different types of projects. And we are always on the hunt for those. So certainly there's a lot of nonprofits in this community that would be a great resource to be able to provide information of new grant proposals that we could submit to come forward. So I think there's a lot of vibrancy and fluidity that would need to happen, but I think it definitely could happen.
Anyone else? Well, I think, one, I want to thank the task force for their recommendations, for looking into this and seeing what we can do to curb youth violence in our local community. Councilman Greider, and to everyone else that's helped lead the efforts, thank you so much. But what I'll rest in saying is that there's no amount of what we can do to try to make sure that we play a lead role in curbing youth violence. I know our police department shouldn't be the only ones faced with the task of trying to work. We need our community partners. And so whether it's the city of Waterloo taking the lead, or whether it's working with partners, like I had the opportunity to speak with Felicia Carter today about some upcoming potential grant programming. And, also one thing that I was thinking about is we need some level of some sort of, I don't know if it's called a repository or something to talk about all the programming that is currently available, because we may have some programming and families may not know how to access it or if it's available. And so maybe one part, if it wasn't already done, is maybe try to take a look at what's already out there, and then let's continue to work forward. But when it comes to protecting youth that we don't necessarily hear from in the council meetings, and some of the youth that may not be able to make presentations in council, we still need to have our hearts and our minds open to figure out how we can be a community of opportunity for those young people as well. So this is just the beginning. We need to figure out some of these things that we can actually take a look at doing quickly to work on that, and then focusing on what we want to pull our resources towards to find some particular grant funding or city support to do things. So I'm encouraged and very grateful for the work and the efforts of people taking on this task. So,
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Second.
motion's been made with the second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We're adjourned.